All right, good morning. Wow. All right. It's great to see everyone today. Thank you for coming early to be with us for this very exciting panel. My name is Danny Washington. I'm a science communicator and ocean advocate, hailing from the beautiful city of Miami, and always good to be in Texas. I love South by and Austin in general. I hope you all have been having a great time as well. But today, the title of our panel is Can Biotech Help Save Reefs, coral reefs? And we're going to have a very interesting conversation with our experts today. And first, I want to kind of gauge the room a bit. I want to know, first of all, how many of you are scuba divers or snorkelers? Okay. And out of those hands, how many of you have seen corals up close? Oh, I love it. Is there anyone in the room who's a biotech fan, biomimicry, any of that type of technology? Excellent. And then last question, how many of you in here are just ocean lovers in general? Okay, great. Excellent. So let's get started. I want to start with a paradox, because when we talk about technology, right now, in the time that we're living, we can engineer cells, we can 3D print organs, we can design nanomaterials, and train AI systems on planetary scale data. Big things. But yet one of the most sophisticated living infrastructures on Earth is unraveling much faster than we can keep up with and protect it. Corals. Coral reefs cover less than 1% of our ocean floor, but they support about 25% of all marine life. They're biodiversity engines, they're coastal defense systems, food security backbones, and economic lifelines for hundreds of millions of people around the world. And yet they're in crisis. And so as they're pushed to the brink, rising temperatures, pollution, overfishing, all these different stressors are causing a lot of problems for corals. But for decades, restoration people like on this panel have been working diligently to help restore our corals, and doing it by hand in a lot of cases. It's extremely inspiring, but it's also very hard to scale. It's a lot of work, and we want to figure out how we can actually scale it to a magnitude that will see significant change. But I want to challenge all of you in the audience today to think, like, what if it wasn't just about saving corals? Maybe it's more about building systems, engineering things that will help us build for resilience. So today's panel is about convergence and where biotechnology, material science, and synthetic biology meet ocean conservation. I'm personally very excited about this. I've been diving since I was 17 years old. Studied marine biology in undergrad and moved into communications after that, because I saw the gap between people understanding the science and passion and why we need to protect oceans in the first place. And so in order for us to scale the impact that we want to make, we have to have innovative financing, prize incentives, and all kinds of things, which we'll hear from Meredith about. So if you care about the frontier of science, deep tech for nature, and building solutions for planetary scale, this is your conversation. So I'm so glad you all are here. And we'll take questions at the end. So we'll leave about 15 minutes for that. So have them prepared. There's a mic in the middle that you can definitely come up to once we finish our main segment. So with that, let me introduce our wonderful panelists. It's been really interesting and just wonderful getting to know each of them over the past couple months. And now we're here in person finally. So first off, I'd like to introduce Meredith Morris. She's a Senior Director of Strategic Philanthropy for Energy, Climate, and Nature portfolio at XPRIZE, an organization built on the belief that bold incentives can unlock breakthrough solutions. Meredith works across her domain for prizes ranging from coral reef restoration to regeneration, decoding and unlocking two-way communication with animals, critical minerals, and human rights, nuclear fusion and fission, and more. Yes, this is long. She's amazing. Welcome, Meredith. Second, we have Dr. Tali Vardi. She is the Executive Director of the Coral Restoration Consortium, the global community of practice that sets gold standards for coral restoration. With 25 years of experience and over 20 publications and more than a decade at the center of the restoration movement, including co-founding the consortium during her time at NOAA, Tali connects science, policy, and practitioners to move the entire field forward. Welcome, Tali. And finally, we have Daniel Wangpraseurt. He's an interdisciplinary marine biologist who leads the Coral Reef Ecophysiology and Engineering Lab at Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. Daniel's work bridges coral science, biophysics, and engineering, and develops tools that enhance coral survival under heat stress and reimagining how we can physically design reefs. He's also the co-founder of Hybrid Reef Solutions, translating cutting-edge research into deployable restoration technologies. Welcome, Daniel. Excellent. Round of applause for our panelists. Okay, so let's get this thing started. As an ocean lover, as someone who has went diving on several reefs, I grew up in Florida, and I've witnessed the decline of coral reefs in my own water backyard. And needless to say, it's not a happy topic, but today we need to talk about solutions, and that's what our focus will be. But I think it's first important for us to set the framework and to understand exactly where corals are right now. So Tali, could you just give us a realistic picture of the current state of world's coral reefs and what are the main stressors that are causing their demise?
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes? Okay, great. So, painting a picture of the world's coral reefs. I want you guys to picture an ICU. Someone, a loved one to you, is in the ICU, the intensive care unit at a hospital. So there's a building, there's systems, there's nurses, there's doctors. Your loved one has not crossed over to the other side yet. They're there. They're breathing in some way, shape, or form, but there are a lot of things keeping them alive. There are short-term solutions like the ambulance maybe that came and got them. And there are ER nurses that are kind of keeping them alive from 1 minute to the next. And there's years of medicine and research that might help them live another, say, 10, 20, 50, 100 years, depending on the patient. That's where corals are at right now. We've lost half the corals that we had starting in 1950. We are due to lose the rest by 2050 under current climate trajectories. Even if we all stop driving and flying around the world today, which would be great if we could just do that. But we're not going to do that. But if we all stop doing that, there's so much greenhouse gas already in the atmosphere. There's so much heat baked into our system that corals are going to be in the ICU through the end of the century. And so what we're here to talk about today is what to do inside that ICU. And that's why we're here and why we work, right? So I think there's a lot of headlines that people hear. Corals are doomed. This is going to save corals. And as, lay people, you feel kind of like you're getting jerked around. Which one is it? And so that's really the scene that I would like to set. It's an ICU kind of scenario where you have to put all hands on deck. And the stressors are really threefold. There are global stressors like climate change, that's the big one. And there are also lots of local stressors. There's overfishing, there's pollution, there's coastal development, and communities that are fixing those things up are buying time. And then the third big stressor is that coral reefs exist in the poorest countries on Earth, in the world's tropics. And there are lots of people working there trying to help their reefs and being those ambulance drivers and those ER nurses, but they're really under-resourced places. So those are kind of the three big stressors as I see them. And then I'll just end with the amount of variability in the system. So we're going to blow past the 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris Accord threshold, which was actually developed with coral reef scientists. We're going to blow past 2 degrees Celsius. There's pretty much no doubt of either of those things. But there's a lot of variability. A reef in Indonesia is not the same as a reef in the Caribbean. And the coral species are not all the same. There's 800 different species of corals, more than that. And even a bleaching event can come through, and you can have one coral next to another. One will survive, one won't. So there's tons of genetic variability. Corals themselves are not really even animals. They're a conglomerate of an animal, a plant, bacteria, archaea, all these crazy things all together at once. And so there's a lot of pieces that we can work with. And that's really the scene, I think, that we'd like you to keep in mind while we're discussing our different perspectives.
Thank you for that scene setting. And Tali, tell us a little bit more about the Coral Restoration Consortium, because you come from science, you have your PhD, all of that, and then you moved into this work where you're bringing together other brilliant minds around the world around corals. How does that play a role in this scene right now? Like, what work are you doing with the consortium?
Yeah, love to. So erase my face for a second. Pretend I'm not here, but instead I'm really here representing the thousands of people around the world who are doing that coral restoration. So it's a piece of the puzzle that often gets ignored, but there are people. There's about 500 million people, like 1 out of 8 people in this world relies on a coral reef. These are really populous countries. Reefs are incredibly productive, especially when they're healthy. And there are communities all over the world really living hand to mouth off of their reefs. And so they are working to save the reefs for their communities, for food, for nutrition, for income. And those are the people that the CRC really was started to unite that community, because we cannot work all individually. They can all come to places like South by Southwest and kind of, right? So I'm here representing that global community. It's incredible. They're what gives me hope and keep me going every day. Like, if there's people working to save the reefs in their backyard, who are we to give up on coral reefs?
Exactly. Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. And I think when it comes to collaboration, we also bring in technology and innovation, and that helps to thrust us into the future. And so, Daniel, with your cutting-edge reef restoration technology, could you walk us through some of the innovations that are emerging right now, things that you're working on in your lab with your students, with your other colleagues? We'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for bringing that analogy with the ICU, actually. So if you think about the tools and technologies that the doctors have to use, we're making those tools, we're making the drugs, we're trying to improve the health of corals. If you think about restoration, restoring an ecosystem is a really challenging thing, right? Most of the people focus on corals. They're the building blocks of the ecosystem. So when you want to grow corals, there's, I think, 3 main bottlenecks that we are addressing with our technologies. Number 1, you need a lot of biomass. You need to grow corals fast. It needs to be scalable. Number 2, you need to enhance genetic diversity. So you got to make sure that corals are adapted and acclimated to climate change. And we need to speed that process up. And then number 3, whenever you have a heating event, and the corals start to bleach, which is they lose their algae and they get sick, essentially, we need to do something in the moment to mitigate that impact. So some of the technologies that we develop are addressing these bottlenecks. So first one is, if you want to grow corals, it's literally like nursing a plant. You have to nourish it, you have to water it, you have to clean it, etc. So when you want to scale that process up, you want to minimize the maintenance and labor and kind of grow more corals faster. So one of the tools we've made is called Coral Guard. It's essentially a substrate where coral can grow on, and you don't need to maintain it. You don't need to clean it. It grows up to 5 times faster, and it has a higher chance of survivorship. The second thing is, when you want to enhance genetic diversity, you have a phase where you have coral larvae. So corals reproduce, having egg and sperm in the water, and then there's a larvae. Now this larvae needs to settle and find a home. And it does that by chemical signaling. So there's certain scents on a healthy reef that makes a coral baby say, well, I want to be there, I'm going to build my home. And it's so important because once they build their home, they're stuck. On a degraded reef, you're losing these essential chemical signals. So we made a material that actually bottles the scent of a healthy reef. And this material you can spray coat on top of a substrate, and then it breaks down and it releases that scent and attracts baby corals. These are nanocarriers, essentially. The third thing is, to mitigate coral bleaching, my lab and other labs as well are working on neutralizing the toxic byproducts that happen during this bleaching process. So essentially, it is related to some sort of toxic oxygen. And we make nanomedicine, small particles that the coral can take up, and it neutralizes that and enhances thermal resilience. So at the end of the day, we're applying bioengineering principles to treating corals. And through that, we allow the coral to repair itself faster. So we're giving it a tech boost.
Wow. Did y'all get that? A lot of technical information, but you explained it so beautifully, Daniel. I know that, working on a nanoscale is complicated, to say the least, but what do you think is the current biggest inhibitor, or what's the barrier, technical barrier that might be standing in the way for progressing your research?
I think more on a systems level, the innovation cycle, restoring an ecosystem is much slower. You want to develop a software, you can iterate quickly, you can get great customer feedback, right? For corals, they're slow growing. It's a big challenge. And they're very different. They're one of the hotspots in the ocean in terms of biodiversity, right? So they have different life history strategies. So not every coral responds the same way. So there's no one solution that fits all. So we need better model systems. We need to develop customized technologies. And then the key challenge is that if we want to develop a tool and test it in the ocean, we have to go through a challenging regulatory approval cycle. So permitting for doing new innovative things in the ocean is really challenging, right? So what we need are innovation hubs, underwater laboratories, where there's an infrastructure that takes care of these hurdles so we can focus on the innovation and actually develop these tools. And then the third thing is scale. A lot of the research that happens is in academic laboratories. If we want to do it at scale, research infrastructure is not set up for that, right? So testing things at a reasonable scale requires another set of financing. So we're thinking about starting companies, venture capital that should feed into that. So really growing a restoration economy that can do these things at scale.
Absolutely. And touching on that idea of working with startups, working with VCs, this is a space that really needs to be invested in. And that, Meredith, this is where you come in at XPRIZE. And I'm just curious, I think a lot of people are excited about technologies like what Daniel's working on, collaborative groups like what Tali is working on, but we need money to make it all work. And you know everything about that. So it's been a challenge in the past, and hence why things aren't scaling as fast as they could. But how difficult has it been for you personally to raise capital for corals?
Sure. So I'm so happy to be here. How many people have heard of XPRIZE before? Oh, that makes me so happy. Sometimes it's only a quarter of the room, and I'm like, all right, we need to tell the story better. So our organization started 30 years ago when our founder wanted to launch commercial space travel. And so it started as this moonshot to create something that hasn't ever been done before. And since then, 30 years, 30 prizes, and we have ones that really inspire such wonder. I was just chatting to folks earlier about, there's one ongoing right now to turn back the age of your organs by 10 years. I'm working on launching a prize that will, for the first time ever, prove ongoing two-way communication with animals in the wild. So really kind of mind-blowing stuff. And then there are those prizes that are out of absolute crisis. And that is what this Coral Prize is. I'm so grateful to have the chance to be able to work on the fundraising for the prize. And I'm also just so in awe of the people that are in the lab, underwater, on the ground, experiencing this every day, and really the heroes of aiming to keep this ecosystem healthy and thriving. So our Coral Prize originally came to be in 2018. So it's been a minute. And I'll share kind of two sets of challenges and opportunity around this prize. The first was an internal one. When we originally created this prize, it was really around hectares of coral and what that survival looks like. And over time, what we've realized that we need to do is really frame this around value. So the value that coral brings to ecosystems, to the world, to human beings. And so we went in and unpacked the prize and said, all right, what does it look like around the value coral brings around fisheries, ecosystem services, the biodiversity component, also as natural infrastructure. It protects us from storm surge. There's a national security component here. There's a whole natural capital piece of it that could be insured and reinsured that we need to start thinking about when it comes to investment value. And then on the other side, kind of building off of what you were talking about, it should be bringing in economic value. There's incredible wonder to these technologies that are being used. It should be in reinvesting in blue economies. It should be uplifting these local economies. So it's, preserving the ecosystem. It's the natural infrastructure and capital. And on the other side of it, it should be creating value and capital. So we went in and revamped the prize. On the other side of that, sets of challenges. So there is this kind of sense of it being a bit of a whack-a-mole for investors. If they want to see a real ROI, it's like, well, if it's not temperature rise, we might be able to figure out a way to create a heat-resistant coral, but then what about all of the runoff and sanitation issues that are happening from, point source land? Or what about the fact that the coral is being smothered with rising sea levels and the sand is kind of like siphoning it under the water? Then there's the shipping, and then there's so it's like, what is the thing? And will we ever be able to get it all right? Unfortunately, I've heard over the years, countries that were investing a lot in trying to save coral are pulling out. Companies have their kind of pet projects that are working in a little pocket of somewhere that they like to talk about. But when it comes to like double-digit million long-term investment, that is something that people seem to have pause around. So first time on our watch, an ecosystem is likely to go extinct. And I just kind of keep asking myself, like, what does that mean for us as human beings if we're willing to say that we'll accept that tipping point? A whole ecosystem going extinct, like, what's the next thing? So as much as, yes, this needs to be articulating business value, I also think there's a come to Jesus moment for us as our own species around the value of what this is and the value of what will be lost.
Thanks, Meredith. Yeah, absolutely. We're at the critical tipping point at this moment. And in order for us to get past this tipping point and actually see solutions rise fast enough within how many years? Around 26? Yeah, give or take some. The value that coral reefs bring to our livelihoods, to our life here on this planet is just so, so important. Daniel or Tali, is there anything else you want to add to what Meredith's talked about as far as the value of coral reefs around the world? How does it add to our lives?
Go ahead.
It's an enormous question. I'm trying to think of a really solid example that will ground it. I'll give you one. Okay, I got one. In Madagascar, fourth poorest country in the world, they did this very, very, very detailed study. It was Belmont Foundation, it was Harvard, and local researchers from basically the Scripps of Madagascar, Gildas Todinanahari. And they did this amazing study where they looked at all these aspects of human health, maternal health, infant health, stunting in children, which happens when they don't have enough nutrition, mental health. And then they did this study all over the country. They looked at inland populations and coastal populations. This is sometime in the past 3 years. And they saw that in the coastal populations, all those metrics of human health were much higher. And that's because those people had access to reef fish. Even today, even with the reefs of today. And so the community, again, this was like a true grassroots project, but with like a little bit of external, I think, Swiss funding. They were able to build, they talked to the fishermen, they realized we don't want to restore old reefs, we want new reefs, we want to increase the total biomass of fish to increase these metrics even more for the coastal populations, and then also find ways of drying the fish and bringing them inland. So in terms of value, like, I think these are the things that are really important to consider, is that there are humongous economies, like in Madagascar, that they have nothing, that they are totally reliant on their natural resources. And by doing these studies and by restoring reefs with the community, they have this lasting program. And they built these little apartment buildings, like out of concrete, about yay big for all the reef critters. They put them on healthy reefs, and then they brought them to these new reefs, and they're already seeing more fish, faster coral growth. So these places, they value their own systems, and they're finding ways to sort of increase it. But those are the kind of like stories that you hear about, people who are really invested in their own reefs. It's really hard to replicate that, globally. I mean, it's not hard to replicate globally. It's hard to like tell those stories because they're from the poorest countries in the world, but this is the local value of these systems for their own people and their own communities.
And I would imagine, I mean, with your work with CRC, you're hearing these stories from all over the world, but it's so nuanced. Every place is different, has different needs, cultural values, all of that. And to navigate that, there's no singular solution, right? But as Meredith was talking about funding and finding ways to scale up and bring it to life, at each of these different projects, we need more money. And Daniel, if you could speak to maybe some of the other challenges you've faced as far as bringing in funding for your research, and where are you hoping to go as far as getting, pulling in more resources?
Yeah. Maybe to follow up on the value and also what Meredith said, we put some numbers to that, right? So it has been estimated that coral reefs provide economic goods and services that are worth more than $3 trillion per year. We have in the US alone over $4 billion per year through overfishing, tourism, fishing, tourism, and coastal protection services. So they are immensely important for protecting our coast from storms. They attenuate over 90% of incident wave energy. And the tourism industry, over $40 billion per year. Surfing, diving, snorkeling, all of that, right? So they're tremendously valuable. But the market hasn't caught up yet. Yeah. So we have a small startup company, right, Hybrid Reefs, and we're looking to really commercialize these technologies to kickstart a reef restoration economy. And talking to VCs, I was very skeptical. They're looking at the ROI. So what am I going to get back? What is the time horizon? To me, coral restoration is deep tech. You look at the clean tech market, where that was 15 years ago, everyone was skeptical too. And now look at how valuable clean energy is, right? So it just takes a leap of faith. And we know it's big solutions that we need. It's a big challenge, arguably the biggest challenge in the ocean right now. And so we need the right people to believe in that, see the value, and start investing in it. Yeah. So that is the challenge that we have right now.
Yeah, dovetailing on what you said about clean tech, I know that recently we were part of an event that talked about tough tech. If you could explain what that means, and if anyone in here is familiar with that term, but it's on the leading edge.
Yeah, so we went to the Engine at MIT, which really focuses on incubating tough tech companies. And that term has been coined primarily to do clean tech, right? So you want to develop a technology where the ROI takes a little bit longer, right? So you have longer time horizons. But you know that if you're able to develop these tools, the payback will be big. So restoration is like that. Some of these big challenges, fighting coral bleaching, it's not going to happen from one day to the next. We need a lot of capital to develop these technologies. So that's the deep tech analogy.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah. And as far as what's essential for us to buy time, Meredith, what have you seen with the conversations that you've had with folks who are interested in investing in coral restoration? What are they saying beyond like, how long is it going to take or anything else?
Right. So I think coming at it from the prize model, there are incredible pockets of promise that are happening around the world. And some of them, you all are working fearlessly on. And what a prize does is it incentivizes collaboration. It also incentivizes speed and scale because there's enough money at the other end for folks to come together in ways that they hadn't before, to share information. So XPRIZE teams can collaborate, and we very much incentivize that, and kind of push things faster and more efficiently than they might have already. Additionally, what's really interesting about the prize is it de-risks the solutions because of how rigorous it is. So an example I'll give you is, we wanted to create a carbon removal industry. And that is what we did through the launch of our $100 million carbon removal prize. It was a very nascent industry at the beginning. There was enough money at the end to incentivize teams to really scale and speed. We're now into the next phase of what that's going to look like with a methane prize that we're aiming to launch. If we can detect and destroy methane, we can actually turn the temperature back in our lifetime. If carbon is the marathon, methane is the sprint. So with something like this in a coral prize, the idea would be is that there would be de-risked opportunities throughout the life of the prize that would be then creating businesses and new business streams and new industries on the other end of it. So that's kind of the point of why we're so urgently wanting to stand this prize up. So it's, yes, saving the ecosystem, and the excitement over what's possible on the other end. The other piece that I'll say too is that we're already thinking about, what these means in terms of systems. So coral is the urgent, at risk of going extinct species, but also what does it look like in terms of the broader discussion around coastal resilience? So we're already looking ahead into, mangroves, seagrass, some of these other, realizing that it is a system. However, we are so excited to get it right with coral. It is really just trying to articulate to investors that the prize is going to be rigorous enough that it's going to create that ROI on the other side for you. And we've had 30 years of prizes that have. So that's the goal.
Gotcha. So if you could have your ideal investor in the room right now, what would you ask them for?
Our prize currently, the way it's framed, it's $30 million prize over 3 or 4 years. I would love to have a little bit more to be able to do some focused bonus prizes and some parts of the world that need the attention the most, as well as have money earmarked for an impact phase on the other side of it to ensure that all of the technology and ideas that come out of the prize can be fostered and incubated and continue to create value locally and globally. That said, we were talking before, because of the urgency, there are ways we could also focus the prize more to have it be a smaller, $10 million quicker effort. I think at this stage, it's really about, again, closing that double-digit $1 million check and getting this thing out in the market so the innovators can do what they're doing and the coral can do what it's doing around its deep passion of survival.
Awesome. And Tali, I know you have tons of experience with funders and how you're able to continue working with CRC. Can you tell me a little bit about how we can create more incentives for other funders to transform research in your field?
Yeah, so tech in the CRC is a critical element of restoration. We have an engineering and innovation working group that focuses on bringing technological solutions out into the world and doing some of that collaboration and sharing and really scaling up by information sharing. But it's really only one element of the thing that we do. And I wouldn't quite say I have tons of experience with funders. Always could use more. But yeah, we really focus on being that voice for the low and middle income countries because actually collaborating and sharing is one way to scale up reef restoration, right? People are learning from each other, they're working together, they're working on shared goals, and that's actually one of the ways that we think scaling up, and it's immediate, right? You can share knowledge pretty easily, you get on a Zoom call, and that's why we're now more recently focused regionally because we really see that is the place where people want to meet, not globally, it's just too much, reefs are too different, but we're really focused on building these regional collaboration hubs where some of that technology and funding can really be focused because the problems are more similar, the time zone is more similar, the language is more similar. So that's kind of the direction that we're going right now.
And what about the gathering that you have coming up, Reef Futures?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Everybody, if you're interested in this talk, you should come to Reef Futures in December. It's a conference that the Coral Restoration Consortium puts on. It's the only international conference that's devoted to coral restoration. It's scientists and practitioners. We fundraise for this conference in order to bring people from those low and middle income countries to the meeting because they normally cannot get to a conference. And so last year we had over 100 scholarship recipients, people from 70 countries. And this year we're going to have a big solutions expo, a barracuda tank where we're going to have like kind of a mini little XPRIZE for a much less dollar figure. But it's really the place of like innovation. And most importantly, it's a place of really good vibes. People come there and they feel inspired to go home and do their work. And the conference, this will be our 4th conference. They always end in song. That's my metric for if the conference went well. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I want to zoom out a little bit before we're zooming through time already. But when we look at the title of this very panel and we talk about can biotech save coral reefs, I have a little bit of a struggle when I hear people say we want to save anything in nature. Because based on what I've learned in this short time I've been on Earth, nature will do its thing and nature will save itself. We're just here to help support it. So from each of you, maybe a quick description of how do you see, the next 20 years of working on coral restoration, but also looking at on a global scale. What do we have to do as humans? How do we need to change our mindset when we're approaching these types of problems? From a science perspective, I think it's really important that we have that conversation. So, Daniel, if you have a chance to what would you say to somebody who's like currently struggling with the idea that we could lose this critical ecosystem around the world? What do you say? How do you talk to your students, your PhD candidates that come to work with you and you continue to give them a bit of realistic optimism of what's next?
There's a range of things. Number one, we know we need to mitigate our emissions. We know we need to reduce the impact of climate change, and that is one thing. But that doesn't exclude the fact that we also, right now, I believe, actively need to restore the ecosystem. So there is this whole conversation that people that work in the restoration field have with other people that think we should not restore. You should monitor the system. You should conserve and protect it, which is super important, but it's not mutually exclusive. The cost of inaction is too high. The rate of change due to climate change is too fast. We need to actively interfere right now. This, to me, the next 50 years is the time of active intervention. And what we do through that is to buy us time. So essentially, even if we get to net zero, in the next 20, 30 years, as Tali earlier said, the impact on coral will be too stark. There will be too much lost. So what we try to do is to restore and accelerate that repair process. And without that, I think, these worst case scenarios of losing corals in the next 26 years, might become true. So the optimism that I have is that, if we work together across disciplines, industry, government, philanthropy, people on the ground, the ambulance, the hospital infrastructure, as Tali said, right? And new tools, I think we can actually make a dent. But it requires effective cross-sector collaboration.
And I think this next generation is really equipped, with their approach in general. Yeah. Would you say? I think every generation has its own baggage, but I think as far as I know, I'm a new mom. I have a 5-month-old. He happens to be here in the back with my partner. And I'm constantly thinking about what does his future look like? What is it going to be? I want him to be able to go out on our local reefs and to snorkel and see what's left and take part in the restoration, for his own future. But yes, so my mind when I think about my son, it's always about like, what's next? How are we going to do that? But Daniel, thank you for that. Meredith, what about you?
Yeah, I would say that the hope lies truly in the incredible people that are so committed to this space. I have been so welcomed as a non-deep ocean background person into a community that can tend to be a little bit more insular. 1% of funding goes to ocean, which is, wild to me. And you would think there would be a lot of competition or a lot of kind of skepticism, especially from folks who have been at this for decades and know the tech so well, of an idea that a prize can just come in and like wave a magic wand and solve something. But the number of organizations that have raised their hand to say, hey, let us give you advice on the prize. Let us introduce you to people that might be able to fund. Let's collaborate. We want to go on this journey with you. So that's been beautiful. And then I think the other piece is really like, yes, the tech is going to facilitate different things, but this is truly a people prize. Like the stewards of this coral will be individuals that are next to it, that love it, that know it. And sort of this reminder of, and I think we're starting to awaken as a species more to this, but we are nature. And this hierarchy of thinking that humans are above things or smarter or don't need things, I think we're starting to learn our lesson that that's not true, and the hard way. So at the end of the day, I think, the expertise, the welcomeness, the collaboration, and the resilience of human beings has just, that's where my hope lies.
I love that. Thank you. And Tali, what gives you that level of realistic optimism to continue doing the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I said before. It's the people that are actually doing the work to save their own reefs. And I just feel very humbled and honored to be able to help give that community a voice and help that community do what it wants to do, which is learn faster, save the reefs better, and do what the corals want to do, which is survive.
Yeah, wonderful. And so we've got about a few minutes before we start questions, but I think to wrap up what you all are talking about, I think we can maybe just tap into, number one, an ocean story of your own as to why you're so passionate about continuing to protect our corals. And then also, what would you say to everyone in this room if tomorrow they could do one thing differently? What should they do to help restore corals and to ultimately protect the ocean? And let's see, who's ready? Meredith, you ready?
So I used to really not like my name. It's like a lot of consonants and it's very long and it's like hard to say, and like Meredith, but it means protector of the sea. So I guess my mom kind of had me destined to care about this. So I did not have a lot of friends as a child. I was kind of one of those weird little introverted kids. And I went to Christian school, which also had its other layers of interesting things. And we had an essay contest for the Press Telegram in Long Beach, California, around something environmental. I was 11. And so I wrote this essay where I wanted to launch an organization called KAPW, Kids Against Polluted Waters. And it was basically, youth activism around keeping our oceans clean. Write the essay, our whole class did. We have always had a Friday church service at the Christian school. So roll up to that thinking it's a regular church service, walk in the auditorium, and I see my parents sitting in the front row. Now, they had a very contentious divorce and never sat next to each other. So I was like, oh, why are y'all? Oh. And then this like big green dinosaur comes out of the corner, which is like the Press Telegram, what's it called? Mascot. And they start playing music and they have this big check for I think it was $500. And they get up there and basically say that I won the contest for my essay.
Wow.
And so, as a person who was pretty shy and tried to sort of not be seen and also rarely had my parents in the same room, that was just a very formidable moment for me. And it was just a special magic moment in life and I'm grateful for it.
So signaling to you that this is the path you needed to take, right?
Right. Yes. And then I think a lot of people don't know that coral is going extinct, and very smart, informed people don't know. And when I go and sort of tell them, they're like shocked. Well, that couldn't happen. Well, why would we? And I'm like, no, it actually could, and it is. So I think, telling your friends. And I think, we all work at places, most of us work at places that have influence in one way or another. We choose where we go on vacation, and a lot of times those are places that are treating their reefs well or treating their reefs not so well. So I think keeping it really top of mind around how we're traveling, who we're talking to, just like continuing to beat the drum on it, because, we've seen animals that were endangered come out of that. The sea turtle is not anymore. And that's because people cared and talked about it enough. So coral doesn't have the cute little sea turtle face, but it's beautiful, it's needed, it's valuable, and it has a right to exist. And so I think finding those ways that we can all, keep the passion going, keep a little anger, a little fire under the bum, and tell your friends.
Excellent. Yeah. Spread the word. Spread the word. So we have about 2 minutes left. So Daniel, could you tell us a quick ocean story and what you would tell the folks in the room right now to do as we leave this panel?
Sure. Ocean story is tough because the ocean is literally my life. I spend so much time in the ocean. I surf, dive, snorkel. I work on coral reefs. So there's not only one story. So it's a huge part of my life. But one of the things that, excites me is seeing who becomes interested in the ocean. So I work with a lot of students, next generation, and these are people from engineering, medical sciences, material science, and AI, and computer science, and they all want to work and help with coral reefs. And that is really exciting to see. So back in the day, you had that vision of the marine biologist out in the ocean, in solitude. That phase is changing. It's a really interdisciplinary effort, and realizing that is so exciting. How all of this is coming together. So, what can you do? I'm speaking to a tech audience. Realize that we need your help. We need the brightest minds to solve one of the biggest challenges in the ocean together. To the people with money, the VCs, believe in this being part of climate tech. This is natural infrastructure. This is a humanitarian crisis, and we need everyone's help.
Thank you, Daniel. Well said. Well said. And Tali, we'll finish up with you.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up swimming. I was a competitive swimmer in my New Jersey suburban town. And then I grew up going to the ocean, to the Mediterranean, where my family's from Israel. And so all I ever knew was very blank, sandy bottoms or black stripes on the bottom of a pool. And then one day I went swimming in Dahab in Egypt. And I just had to go in because I always go in water whenever it's near me. And that was the first time I saw a coral reef. I was 19 years old. I was traveling around the world. And nobody warned me that that's what was happening underneath the beautiful blue flat thing that everyone else was looking at. And I got out and I threw up, I passed out. I just had no idea of the amount of life and color and crazy creatures. Later, I did my master's degree in that same kind of region of the world. And I saw a creature that I'm going to tell two stories. Sorry, I know we're running short on time. But I saw a creature that I still don't know what it is. It was kind of looked like a flatworm. And it swam like this, not side to side. It was about this big. It had two antennas and eyeballs sticking out the top, and it was multicolored. And I was like, I've never figured out what it was. I've asked around, and now I purposely don't look for the answer because that's the amount of mystery that happens on a coral reef, because we talk a lot about the corals and I focus almost exclusively on the corals, but the amount of biodiversity and crazy shit that lives on a reef. I mean, mantis shrimps that can punch through your dive booties and they see, I think, 1,000 more colors than we can see. It's just insane. And so I think the thing that I will leave you with, if you guys all have, the what can I do kind of philosophy, is just remember that ICU analogy, that now is the time It's very easy to get jerked around and feel like we're doomed, we're saved, we're doomed. But now is the time. So if you're in any position of power, large or small, when you're on vacation, or whether you're investing or you're a corporate sustainability officer, whatever your power is, this is a place of investment. And the only reason that corals haven't gotten the attention they have is because they've been doing all this work for millennia for free. And it's not part of national government's accounting systems. All of their value has just been taken for granted. And now it's our time to thank them back.
Thank you, Tali. Wow. Can I get a round of applause for our panelists? Y'all are amazing. So we've got a few minutes here. 10 minutes for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please come to the mic right in the center. And we'll go ahead. Ma'am in the purple. Yes.
Fabulous panel. Thank you all. I love your comment about doing all this free work. It reminds me of housewives and mothers, and I think that's an analogy. I write a newsletter. I'm going to put it in. Main question, Daniel. We saw in this video loop these skeletons, and when I've watched CNN, I think it's not Oman, maybe it's Qatar, but they have a lot of advertisements come to us where our tech, and they show these people making these octagonal forms. Could you tell us more about those forms? Did you place those forms, or where are they, and how successful are they?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is probably what is called a reef star. And reef star is just an infrastructure where you can attach corals to. So if you had a coral and you wanted to outplant it in the ocean, you got to attach it to something, right? So you got to build the infrastructure first. So that infrastructure that you see there is widely successful. It has pioneered a lot of work in Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia. One of the biggest, reef star reef exists there. And yeah, they're low cost and they're modular and easy to install. So that's why.
Great question. Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Thanks.
I'm Nick. Thank you guys for this conversation. As a communicator and as someone who advises businesses on how to prioritize their corporate sustainability, do you guys have a toolkit? Do you guys have things that you've seen have resonated with kind of different stakeholders inside of a corporation who, to the point you all made, have very different kind of standards for ROI, right? So especially with ocean where you can't really see it below the surface, what has resonated as far as you guys having conversations? And as a communicator as well, what stories do you guys see resonate the most and kind of move your needle from where you are to where you want to be?
So maybe that first part, Meredith, do you want to try that?
Yeah, so I think that this prize has such capacity to inspire wonder and excitement. It's so beautiful, it's not like the methane one's important, but we're not putting that on a shirt, right? So like between documentaries, between following the people that are doing the work, between the beautiful visuals from the ground, watching these things grow and being able to show the impact of what's happening, I would think it'd be a no-brainer for a corporation, especially one who makes all of their money from the ocean, and there are many of those. What I have found oddly is that either there's there's, again, those pet project investments is, we're doing something on coral, but it's in one small place, it's not broad, and it's usually not in a large amount of money. So I think what we need is a brave organization who wants to hitch their brand to literally saving an ecosystem, like to be able to say that you're responsible for doing that and invest in coastal economies and all the storytelling. I mean, it's ripe for someone to pick that up, but it is going to need a significant multi-year investment that cannot waver with the price of oil. It can't change depending on how stocks are doing or what's going on with geopolitics. It needs a good multi-year, double-digit million-dollar investment.
Maybe. Yeah, so thanks, Nick, for the question. So I have, a lot of experience talking to VCs and asking them about, investing in the restoration market. And it's always very challenging because you look at, the services they provide, coral reefs, so biodiversity credits and offsets, is not really moving very fast. It's super important, but it's not moving fast enough. Tourism opportunities, yes, that's very critical, but then, who pays for it? The hotel, the government, who subsidizes? The customer is still a bit unclear. Now, the biggest opportunity is in coastal resilience. So looking at coral reefs as natural infrastructure that protect our coast, because that's a multi-billion-dollar market. And when you look at the startup companies that are successful in raising money, that is the narrative that they tell. And it's so true, because corals attenuate over 90% of wave energy. And at the same time, they provide fish and biodiversity. And they're essentially a renewable system. Rather than a concrete wall, it's going to degrade at some point. They grow, they calcify. It's a smart system.
And Tali, you want to add on?
Just really quick, because I'd rather get the questions, or more questions. But the thing that I hear the most from people like corporate sustainability officers and funders, like impact investors, that kind of thing, is that the metrics aren't there. And that's something that we're working on actually with the woman who asked about the stars. That's the Mars Corporation that actually funds all of that work. They're arguably one of the bigger restoration organizations, and because they're a private corporation that's not publicly traded, I think. Is that true? Yeah.
Are you talking about Mars, like as far as candy?
Mars candy bars.
Candy.
Yeah.
Pet food.
Yeah, it's true. They're not public. Yeah, it's a privately owned company. They do sustainability because that's what they believe is right, and so. Banks and investors have come to them to try and talk about what the metrics can be, and it's complicated. It's complicated because what Meredith said, like, it's a whack-a-mole game on a coral reef. But I know from the UN Oceans meeting last year and going to that Blue Economy Finance Forum that it's like without metrics we can't get the investors, and so that's something that I mean. Open invitation, because it's a complicated project, but it's something that we know we need to do in order to attract that kind of funding.
But it's kind of like cart before the horse. You need the money in order to do the research to get the metrics, and then you can actually...
It has to fund us to actually do that work, because it's complicated. We have to get the economists and the finance people in the room. We're actually, anyway.
And if I could add on lastly about communication, Nick, as the last 15 years I've been working in television and traditional media, telling stories about science, telling stories about the ocean. And what I've found the most impactful has been culture. How do you bring local culture into that story? Because the ocean is so vast and large, obviously it's out of mind and out of sight for a lot of people. And I mean, my heritage, my grandmother's from Jamaica. She grew up on an island, literally on the coast, never learned how to swim. And that was because of cultural influence of being fearful of the ocean, or our own, ancestral line of how the trauma that happened on the ocean. So these are all endpoints, I think, that we can find to communicate to everybody in different cultures and different realms of the world. But we have to include that human story and infuse it in everything that we talk about. So thank you for that question. It was excellent. All right, come on up. We still have some more time.
Hi, my name is Amanda Nummy. I'm a material scientist and engineer with an expertise in biomimicry. And one of the biggest challenges that I see in doing this type of work is the gap in the priorities or the focal lenses versus an engineer and designer are looking at coral reefs and the design inspiration that can come from them. So we've touched on it a little bit, but I'm just wondering if we can go deeper into the how or the process that we're convening these multidisciplinary groups in terms of if there's lessons learned or best practices, and what types of stakeholders are leading the charge in bringing these different groups together.
That's a big one. That's a good question. And I wish we had way, way more time. In fact, I totally geeked out when I found out that I could moderate this panel with these particular experts, because they have such a vast knowledge of all those topics. But I think if we maybe just touch on, I think, Tali, you might be the most equipped because of interdisciplinary, you and Daniel, perhaps, interdisciplinary work.
I'm not 100% sure I understood the question.
I can speak to it, but as you said, it's a big question. And maybe you start small scale first, because in my lab, I have students that are engineers and biologists, material scientists, actually these three mainly, and they want to work together and they look at the world very differently, right? So as you said, the first thing is, what are we doing this for, right? So looking at what are the metrics, and it's tricky because some people say, well, we got to restore function. We got to restore service. We got to restore coral, get more corals to grow, right? So at the end of the day, we need all of it. But the sequence is the question. I like to start with the foundation, which is the coral. So we're focusing on the bottlenecks there. And so we, in our lab, have clear metrics on what we need to achieve. The engineer will develop a lot of different solutions with, some properties that might not be relevant to achieving the outcome. But having a clear, vision, which is, to safeguard coral reefs for the next 26 years, that helps. And I think this in the CRC as well, there is the engineering and innovation working group, right? So that try to scale these new solutions, but they're influenced by the overall vision of the CRC to,
Yeah, well, I was going to say you might be a great candidate for the chair of our engineering innovation working group. But that is a place where people with these ideas from across the board can come together. And I think maybe one of the new goals for that group can start to be to outline what the problems and the challenges are, to focus some of the folks in these interdisciplinary fields for research. So not just in Daniel's lab, but in other labs and also around the world. So yeah, happy to talk more about it after.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, definitely meet us in the hallway if you can.
Okay, I will.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. Okay, we've got, are you asking a question in the back, ma'am, with the brown jacket?
Yeah.
Okay, you can come on up, but no, go ahead, ma'am, you go first.
Just a quick question about, you mentioned collecting the coral neophytes or whatever, but could you tell us a little bit about genetic selection for thermotolerance, especially like what's happening in Australia with the Great Coral Reef?
it's a little bit of a bigger...
That's another big question. We can take that in the hallway, is that okay?
Is that okay? Because...
Great. Okay, we've got to cut it off. Okay, so we'll take any further questions in the hallway. Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists, Tali, Daniel, Meredith. Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.